And then I'll do my share. Well, I'll start the summary too, which is, I found the summary is fairly useful. So I'll start with that on this screen. You guys should disappear. Okay, over there. Boom. All right. And I was actually make it the right size. Hello over the other side. It is rather nice to see my monitor sticking out there. The creative monster that it is. Okay, right. So, um, so what I did last week, of course, was go through. I'll just actually hang on a second and hide the thing across. What I did last week was go through the way the theory fails, even if humans are rational, as Samuelson defined them. So let's just take a look at why would they fail? What's the actual mathematics going on behind here? And the basic idea is, again, these things, when you write them down at a trivial scale, it looks, reasonably okay. You're looking at a two-dimensional page of paper. You can only have two commodities shown on that, A and B, B and A. It's easy to work out which ones you prefer. And if you look at the number of calculations, if you actually imagine somebody behaving this way, then they've got just two items in every bundle they're looking at, just two commodities. And even if there's say 100 commodities, 100 different combinations you look at, anywhere between 0 and 9 of each, then you get something extremely simple like this. There's your budget line. There are your numbers of biscuits, your number of bananas, and there are some combinations which you simply rule out because they're too far away from your, far too far inside your budget. You don't need to calculate those, or the ones that are completely outside. There's only a handful that both the so-called utility map and the budget line come roughly close to each other. So you need to do your calculations. So you've got 10 pairs to look at there. You've got to do 10 sums of the budget involved. You do 10 comparisons of how much utility do you get from each of those, piece of cake. But then when you want to add another commodity to the list, what do? And this is the point that I think Alvin jumped in first of all last week. You've got to add another axis. So each time you look at a new commodity, you've got an extra axis. So 2 just gives you 100 if you're looking at between 0 and 9. 3 gives you 1,000. 4 gives you 10,000. And as you keep on going, you get just a ludicrous number of potential combinations. So if you have 8 commodities, that's 8 dimensions, so an 8-axis system there. And then if you imagine there are just 5 combinations that students would look at, and they were, from what I understand of the experiment, they were allowed to consume as much as they like of each of the items up to the full budget line. But if there were just, say, 5 discrete combinations possible, 0 minutes or 15 or 30 or 45 of a video, but not 43 or 38 minutes, then you get 390,625 different combinations. And again, the way to visualize that, imagine 400,000 shopping trolleys. And you've got to say which of those shopping trolleys you prefer to the others, given the budget line. It is just ridiculous. There wouldn't be 10 calculations you'd need to do. There might be 15,000 calculations you need to do. It just becomes ridiculous the further you scale it up. So your combinations of things like this, and each of those would be, if you wanted to put it in a category, it's a separate shopping trolley containing those different items. And which do you prefer? Well, you simply can't work it out. It's just impossible to work at that fine level of granularity. So what we'll do is, and this is with the actual behavior we have, if you're a chocoholic, you'll take the stuff with more, you'll take one with more chocolate. If, it'll be something quirky in terms of the neoclassical definition of rationality, but it'd be rational from our point of view. That's the thing that most maximizes your utility. So if you then try to process this stuff using the idea of utility maximizing behavior, you get all sorts of reversals, all sorts of irrational behavior. But in real life, no, because what you face is an absolutely bewildering array of choices. Now, we don't even think about this, but most supermarkets you walk inside have got over 1,000 different products, most about 10,000 actually. Well, if you want to make a decision of whether you do or do not buy one item in every element in a supermarket, that is 2 to the power of 10,000 choices. Now, 2 to the power of 10,000 is far more than the number of atoms in the universe. Okay, so the reality is about this bewildering array of choice And the difficult thing is not choosing what's the maximal option for you. It's making a satisfactory choice in a finite time. And if you just imagine you go, and I want to give a few little examples here to just illustrate just how rapidly this becomes unworkable as a model of how consumers behave. Let's say there's 100 items, so 1% of the size of a standard supermarket, and you're going to buy either 1 or 0 units of everything. Then that's going to give you 2 to the 100 combinations. Now that I can't even say that number out loud. You've got to work in millions and billions. It turns out to be 1,000,000 trillion different combinations. So if you walked into an ordinary supermarket and had to make that decision, you could literally fill 1,000,000 trillion shopping trolleys. Okay? So that is just impossible level of choice. And therefore, what you've got with revealed preference, which looks like a definition of rational behavior, is a toy model that can't possibly scale to reality. And when you look in the area of computing, this is why I'm so glad I spent as much time as I did in the computing industry before I became an academic economist, it's what's called an exponential complexity problem. The number of combinations scales exponentially as you add linearly. So going from 2 to the 50 is 2 to the 1, pretty simple. Okay, 2 to the 2, simple. 2 to the 5, starting to get a bit of a challenge. 2 to the 10, hang on a second, I haven't got that long. 2 to the 100, forget it. Okay, and it just scales out of contention. That to buy or not to buy is 2 to the n problem, where n is the number of commodities you're looking at, and that therefore means you get a ludicrous explosion. 2 to the 2 is 4, 2 to the 3 is 8, 2 to the 10 you're talking 1,000, 2 to the 30 you're talking, what is that? That's 1 billion combinations, 1 billion shopping trolleys. So you simply cannot make a decision following those rules. It's beyond the computing power of our brains. And that, if you're going to have a definition of rationality, it has to at least assume we have brains that fit inside our own skulls. Not we assume we have brains the size of the known universe. But that's what is actually involved when you try to extrapolate this model to anything resembling realistic behavior. So 50, 2 to the 50 is 1,000,000 billion. Yeah. And then if you just want to say, well, how long does it take you to work all this stuff? Imagine you could calculate the utility of a bundle to you, your subjective utility, in 1/10,000th of a second. We're pretty damn fast. So that means you could look at 10 million shopping trolleys a second and work out the utility and decide which one to go for. How long would that take with 50? Just do your linear scaling there. It's 2 to the n, okay, which is 2 to the 50, divided by 10 billion. And I'm now dividing it by the number of seconds in a year, and the answer to take you 3.5 years. Okay? This is why this stuff just does not work when you try to apply it to the real world. And it gets worse. So if you imagine that the brain, look at the brain and say we've got 10 to 11 neurons, that's a fair number of neurons. It's 100 billion neurons, apparently. I just find these numbers ridiculous, but that's apparently how many neurons we have inside our brains. And you then have 1,000 connections at the maximum level. Each neuron can attach to 1,000 other neurons. And then what you've got, the signaling is actually voltage spikes, which are as it happens, are transmitted by positive potassium ions. One reason why potassium is so important. And you take about a 1,000th of a second to generate a spike, which there's going to travel down the axon to the dendrites, go onto another neuron, and so on. And that is a bit like the way the data is transferred inside analog computer. Now, if you did it with an actual computer, it might take you 100 steps to do that sort of calculation. And it's equally many signals per neuron are necessary to make a basic action. One little fun thing I've learned in my studies outside the area of economics, by the way, is that as well as having neurons that make other neurons fire, we have neurons that make other neurons not fire. And that's the sort of skeptical circuitry that's laid down in our brains between the age of about 14 to 22, particularly heavy period where that skeptical the neurons are laid down. Now, I'm a great fan of Amsterdam and a great fan of what you can buy in the coffee shops of Amsterdam, and I'm very pleased I didn't start smoking that stuff until I was 22, because apparently after that period, you've got the suppressions, cynical circuitry laid down, and all the marijuana does is turn that off. But if you consume the stuff between the age of 14 and 22, it scrambles it. And I have a serious theory that a lot of the conspiracy theory bullshit we see comes out of people who smoked dope when they were too young. Anyway, that aside, so if you actually look how long it takes us to perceive something, it tends to be the order of 1/100th of about 1/10th of a second, 1/20th of 1/10th. And so if you wanted to have 100 perceptions to actually make a decision about whether you maximize or don't maximize utility by choosing a particular combination, then looking at that brain with 10 to the 11, if it was entirely devoted to utility maximizing, and every decision took 5 seconds, given that number of calculations, then your brain could do 5 by 10, could calculate each decision at 5 by 10 to the minus 11 seconds, which is pretty damn fast. And therefore, in that case, you take an hour, 2/3 of an hour, to go shopping in a 50 commodity shop. But what happens when you want to go to a larger shop? Yeah, it just becomes ridiculous. Okay, so if you imagine going to a larger shop, then you just get, when you get to the stage of 100 commodities, which is not, it's only doubling the number of commodities, but it increases the amount of time involved from just under an hour to 80 billion years. Okay, that's 6 times the estimated age of the universe. So this is why economists should get out of their bloody armchairs and go and talk to other disciplines and see just how realistic their models of human behavior have. And the basic problem is the scaling of the number of comparisons is exponential. And that's 1 plus the number of units you're going to buy raised to the power of the number of commodities you're considering buying. And so that 50 commodity shop, you get 10 million billion different combinations, and that makes them non-computable. Okay? You simply cannot choose the optimum bundle in that situation. And it's simply impossible, no matter how much, if your problem scales exponentially as your components of the problem scale linearly, there's simply no chance to reach an optimum decision. And that therefore means that what neoclassicals think only applies to what are called polynomial problems. And that's where you get like n, if it was n to the 2, then n squared would be 10,000 with 100 commodities, which is nothing. Okay? But it's because it's the other way around, 2 to the n, then it's 2 to 100, which is a ludicrously large number. So it simply isn't possible to be rational the way neoclassical economists define rational. And as usual, their definition of rational is irrational. So this is the type of class of problems you have. You want to add up n numbers, there's n processes involved, and if the input is 10, then you have 10 operations, 20 is 20 operations, etc., etc. That's easy. Sorting numbers is an n squared operation. That's also quite easy. But utility is a 2 to the power. Those are polynomial problems which can be solved, but exponential problems cannot be solved, and you get ludicrous results coming out of it. So if you can make 1 billion comparisons a second, which is huge, and you wanted to look at 100 commodities, it'd take longer than the age of the universe raised to the power of the age of the universe to make those decisions where you want to make four commodities in a 100 commodity shop. So there's no way that their idea of rational behavior describes what we can do. It simply falls over the very first step of completeness. That's why you got all those weird results that Sippel saw. It wasn't because students didn't know their own utility, didn't know what satisfied them. They certainly couldn't make the type of decisions that neoclassicals think we make all the time, and do that in a realistic time frame. So completeness, reality is we can't compare that many options. It just falls out the window. Transitivity, non-association, and convexity are all breached because they depend upon completeness. So you can't get anywhere without them. And one I haven't included in this lecture, I must actually go and see if I can find it. But that was von Neumann's one complaint about the axioms of revealed preference. He wasn't sure that completeness held. But that obviously meant he didn't work it out, because if you sit down and work it out, as I've shown here, clearly it doesn't hold. So he was actually trying to get rid of indifference curves and all that utility shit when he wrote the theory of games. But of course, what neoclassicals did was take his theory of game stuff and paste it onto the utility concepts to give us expected utility theory. So as usual, they stuff things up. So what are we doing? What are we doing to actually be rational? We're satisficing. This is partly where Vernon Smith and Ritchie and co come in. Our actual behaviour is to choose a satisfactory bundle in a finite time. We consider the most desirable items. So again, in that shopping trolley, you've got to have some protein there, otherwise your family is going to be hungry after dinner. So protein comes first. You've got to have, fruit, because we can't process vitamin C. We created ourselves, etc., etc. And we use habit. And that means we can walk into a 10,000 commodity shop and walk out half an hour later with a full shopping trolley that keeps us alive and satisfies our main needs. And a lot of that comes down to categories as well. So when you need protein, if you buy fish, you're not necessarily going to buy beef and chicken at the same time, unless you're buying for a week's cooking, and you want a bit of variety there. But you will make a combination, and you purchase within categories, and you stick with what you've bought beforehand. And what you can see that is doing is drastically reducing the dimensionality. So if you think about a typical supermarket, like 10,000 different products, there'll be 30 products in one particular type of product, with 30 types of chili powder, and that sort of thing. I'm talking Thailand there, obviously. But you'd have, and then you'd categorize also meat, categorizes things, fruit categorizes things, cereals categorizes things, and that drastically reduces how many comparisons you're making, and that means you can make a much faster decision. So what you get is computational complexity overwhelms optimizing behavior. And computer scientists understand this, and they put things beautifully as well. I've lost this book on my travels. It might be inside my collection downstairs that I've still got to unpack here, but I'm not sure. But this is a wonderful statement of the problems. If the brain is performing computation, it should obey the laws of computational theory. What are they? Computability and complexity. And this is how they paraphrase. You cannot compute nearly all the things you want to compute. And that's the Gödel-Turing proof that most things can't be proven within the framework within which they're developed. And the things you can compute are too expensive to compute. So therefore, computing has developed all these various algorithms for sampling a huge option space and still trying to choose the most maximal outcome. One of those, one that was used in a lot of attempts to fit highly nonlinear problems, called the Lavergue-Marquardt approach, and that basically takes the phase space of possible outcomes for a choice, and then calculates the height of all of them, finds a local area of height, but then jumps a large dimension to avoid being locally locked down. And it's a way of rapidly sampling a large space of potential outcomes, and not knowing you won't necessarily get the best, but giving you the best possible chance to find as many of the best options and then choose the bestest of the ones you find. But completeness is simply impossible. You will not find optimal answers to anything. So as usual, the neoclassical theory looks great in the 19th century. It should have been abandoned in the 20th, and we're still stuck with this garbage. So revealed preference disappears. You can't characterize individual behavior using indifference curves and budget lines. It's simply impossible to do that. And your rational behavior is you make a satisfactory consumption decision in a finite time. But of course, neoclassicals avoid this all the time. They don't read their own literature when it contradicts the results they want. They certainly don't read critics like me. And therefore they've continued producing this stuff and still teach it at universities as if it's gospel. So what I'll show next week is that even before this problem was worked out, this was that in terms of actually bringing this to a head, it was Sippel's paper in 1998 that brought it to a head and said this doesn't work at an experimental level. But before that, they proved that even if this did work for individuals, you still couldn't aggregate those individuals and get a downward sloping market demand curve. So I'll cover that next week. It's easily the greatest own goal in economics because neoclassical economists proved it and then tried as hard as possible to hide the results not only from other neoclassical economists, but especially from themselves. Okay. I always feel I feel I've cheated you guys when I stopped so early, but this is the whole idea of the short lectures. How long was that? It's about 20 minutes. So that's within the ballpark. Any comments? Apart from the fact that I've got an obvious double chin forming here. I hate the side profile. This is my best side profile. Oh, look at my drag you guys over here. There we go. That's better.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi there. My question is about when you're talking about the computability, is it P versus NP question?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And like again, that shows you about some education and computing, which economists are so brain dead when it comes to the advances computing has given us and how we understand decision making and so on. Yeah, so P versus NP, polynomial versus exponential.
Right.
We have to get teaching actuaries stop relying on the economists. If we could actually at least get you guys to say that people have to do an accredited course, which might be one that I taught rather than the nonsense from neoclassicals. That could be such an improvement of what you're doing at the moment with the younger generation of actuaries.
Yes, I got some. We've very recently had a new appointment as a chair of a new board to govern the profession.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's public yet though. So this is are you still recording this then?
Tell you what, I'll turn the recording off. Should we have a conversation with the recording off, everybody? Okay, let's do that. So I'll stop the recording. Sorry. Hang on a second. I can pause record
video.
Oh, yeah. There is an option. I found it out last time. So I'll now go and share the screen again. Okay, let's see. Layout and options. Let's see. Share sound. Okay. Optimize the video clip. Okay, now I'll try sharing. So let's see how it works this time. Let me know. Talk over me if you can't hear it.
We use data on 174 countries over the last half century. We also conduct
Pat, why did it stop like that? Hang on.
a within-country study of the US economy, using data at the state level and across 10 economic sector activity. What we find is that climate variations, they lead to costly production volatility and have adverse effects on labor productivity. In the most conservative scenario, the losses associated with climate change is around 7%.
Sorry, pardon me.
Of global GDP. So given that policy at the national level might have been influenced by previous studies arguing that climate change will lead to losses for hot and poor nations, but that advanced economies will not be affected or under some scenarios even benefit from higher temperature deviations, we are hoping that our research, which clearly shows that there are negative long-run growth effects of climate change affecting all countries, doesn't matter whether a country is rich or poor or hot and cold. We're hoping that these results will change the mindset of policymakers, which believe that climate change will not impact their economies in a meaningful way.
Yeah. This is my semi-conclusion slide here. These wonderful cartoon. And I think I promote my own work here and say, please take a look at these other sources. But I finish with this particular slide, and I'll go through this and then go back and we can talk about Kamiya Mahadi's in particular. So that's data over the last 2,000 years. That, of course, is the start of the Industrial Revolution. You can see the increase in temperature since then. If we go back and look over the last 12,000 years, then that's when the pyramids were built. That's when Göbekli Tepe, now known as one of the oldest sites, much older than Cheops. That's when that was built. And if we go back and see, well, how does that look in terms of the last 100,000 years? That's the last glacial period when temperatures were 6 degrees colder than they are now. And human civilization is just that little bump there. If we go back further still and look at the last million years, then people say the temperature is always changing. Yes, it is, and it's things called Milankovitch cycles which are driving those changes, and those are the peaks. And of course, you can see human civilization was built on one of those Milankovitch peaks. That's when we evolved. We only had really 2 of them to choose from. So it's on at that very last peak we built civilization. If you go back further still and take a look at the last 2 million years, then you can see ice ages began about 1.5 million years ago. It's a very unusual period in the planet's history. And over the very long term, back to 65 or 70 million years ago, there's been a generally downward trend in temperature, but the volatility we're getting now is due to this ice age effect. That's when the dinosaurs went extinct. So if you go back and say, well, let's now take a look at the last 100,000 years again, and you can see that we built our civilization on the very small peak of a heat hill in the middle of 50,000 periods of glaciation. And everything we've built depends upon, all the infrastructure we've got depends upon conditions at that period of time. We should have tried to stabilize the planet's temperature at that level. We would have got to the Jetsons' future ultimately. If we hadn't interfered with the climate, we would have gone down here, back to where this guy was the dominant life form on the planet. Instead, what we're doing is going this way at 30 times the speed of the natural cycle. And that is not rational or natural, that is suicidal. So that's my little presentation for next week anyway. Okay. Have to wait and see how it goes down. Can I Zoom when you're recording this meeting? I'm trying to turn off the time. 22 minutes. That's not too bad. I wasn't giving a formal presentation there, but I think I can get through that 20 minutes with a public audience. What do you think about Kamio Mahardis?
He seems to think he's on the side of the angels.
I know they do. They fucking well think they are. This is why they're so damn dangerous. And I made the point in debunking, and this comes back to a wonderful teacher I had at high school, who was he used to let us have religion classes became discussion classes, which were chaired by a member of the class, and he'd sit at the back of the room and basically let us say whatever we liked to say. He was absolutely fabulous, man. And then we were having a discussion about some politician, and another guy was chairing the group, and somebody, lots of us were criticizing him, and somebody said, but at least he's sincere. And we all said, yeah, okay, fair enough, he's sincere, we accept that. And the teacher piped up and said, I wish I'd asked him why he said this. Never overrate sincerity. The most dangerous person you'll meet in your life is the maniac chasing you down the road with an axe, sincerely trying to chop your head off. Now, that sincerity is actually dangerous when it's attached with delusional views, and that's coming out as a classic case, because like Toll's a prick. Toll's a total asshole, and the sort of person. And socially, what I'd like to do is throw a beer over him and smash him in the face. Okay, Kamio, I'd like to clink a glass and say, "How are you doing, mate? He's a lovely human being," but he's dangerous because he believes this stuff and he thinks he's doing good.
It reminds me of my student days in the late 60s in a hall of residence, and it was a Roman Catholic hall of residence. There was one particular very evangelical Roman Catholic, and there was a group of us who under no circumstances could call us either evangelical or Catholic. And we had a discussion between ourselves and said, okay, we're going to have a discussion with him at least once a week. And the challenge is to get him to the stage where he says, well, that's what I believe, and you're never going to change it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it took us 2 minutes, and sometimes it took us 2 hours.
Yeah.
But it always happened.
Yeah, because at some point bang its belief. And that's the thing. We're a creature that shares beliefs. And we live by our beliefs, and our identity is tied up with those beliefs are. And that's where the variety in cultures come from, which is fabulous. But it's also where the variety in delusions come from, which is terrifying. And this is the greatest delusion of all. He actually thinks he's doing good.
That angle sounds like a really good one this conference. The issue of sincerity and belief and the interaction between the two being bad, not good.
Yeah, yeah. I'll see how much. I mean, I've only got 20 minutes. Literally, that's my time slot. Is I think it's 12:45 to 13:05 or something like that nature. So very brief, but I'm so glad I've got that excerpt from Camellia, because I can claim they think they're doing good, but you have to see it to believe it. And like the comment you made about, studies will benefit from climate change. Well, it's not the bloody scientists that have been saying that, it's the economists. And it makes it obvious the economists only talk to other economists, listen to other economists, and the trouble is the politicians, most of them have done an economics degree or an economics component in their studies. They haven't done science. And they themselves don't realize how crazy it is to be talking in terms of 4 and 8 degrees of warming. But that's the mentality they're in, and they believe 4 degrees. Who cares? It means that London will have the climate of Madrid. Big deal.
It's
Yeah.
as if it was a comedy of errors.
I wish it was laughable.
Steve, I had a couple of thoughts about the presentation. I can email you them rather than take the time now.
Share
I'll
them here anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you want me to talk about them now?
Yeah, why not? Because it's a bit of, we're going to finish. I enjoy having a chat with you guys, and otherwise it's going to finish too early. So,
one general comment is, are you going to swear? Because you said shit a couple of times, and I think you said wanking out of it. I don't know if that's intentional.
I've got shit in one of the slides. You didn't notice that.
You have shit in one of the slides as well. I mean, it depends on the audience.
I'm going to shock them out of it. I want to shock them out of it, because everybody's so deluded and it's talking about this stuff as though changing what you can do over a cup of coffee is going to solve the world's problems. Say, wake up, guys. You're going to find it's terrible that I say shit right now. Wait till you're living it in less than 5 years' time, which is quite feasible.
Yeah, I mean, what the economists have done is it's so absurd that it's like you don't need to sort of emphasize it. You know what I mean? It's like, but anyway, that's minor point. And one point I would say is you use the word ergodic.
Yeah.
Now I don't, and I didn't know what it. I'm an actuary. I didn't know what that meant until I went to you. Actually, you told me about ergodicity economics, and the only people I know that do know it are academic actuaries. So I doubt if anyone in your audience will know what that means.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I can elaborate on the climate of space equals time assumption, which is what that basically is. The space is the same as time. So I'll fix it. I'll add an extra sentence to that. I might not get a chance. They've actually asked me to send it by today, Wednesday. They said, so I can probably send it and get it amended for tomorrow morning. So I will work on that point. Yeah, I'll leave shit in there though.
and another point is what you talked about thermohaline circulation, and in brackets Gulf Stream. But I saw a presentation on this not too long ago by a scientist who pointed out actually those are two different things, and the Gulf Stream will not shut down. That is, the Gulf Stream is caused by rotation of the Earth.
Yeah.
Thermohaline circulation is the AMOC, is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, and that could switch off. It's actually two different things.
I know. I think I've got an inverted commas, haven't I? I was actually going to search and see, because I know when you're talking to people, technically it's wrong. I've got it in inverted commas. So the reason for that is that people who say, like, we call it the Gulf Stream, but in fact the Gulf Stream is two things, and the one of them is it's the Coriolis effect that causes the Gulf Stream plus, and it's a surface level thing, whereas the actual AMOC is temperature and salinity differences, and it's well below the surface of the. So I'm aware of that. But the inverted commas there, in fact, you wonder what I'm talking about.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know myself until within the last year. I saw a nice video by a scientist. That was it. And then maybe, last comment is not about your presentation, but it's just about what you were talking about in terms of ideologies and how societies operate according to that's I've come to realize that, and reading, particularly reading anthropologists like David Graeber and others, and when you look from the outside and then you understand that it's how societies work, it's how human beings work, and you have a shared set of beliefs, and it doesn't matter if the beliefs are absurd, and in some ways it even helps because it binds people together, and so it kind of you can see how it's sort of been adaptive because human beings cooperate with each other, and it's how we cooperate. But and then what's occurred to me is, so that's a natural way of thinking, right? So people operating according to belief systems. But science is really, like, scientific revolution is what, 400 years ago or something. So whereas we've had civilizations for 5,000 years, so it seems like science is the unnatural way of thinking, right? So science is supposed to be not ideological, and you always will change your mind based on, if new evidence comes along, you change your belief, right? And that seems to be quite unnatural, but also politics, there's a fundamental thing going on here, which is that politics is about ideology. So how we run ourselves is fundamentally unscientific or not scientific, and can never be scientific. So you've got this problem where it doesn't matter how good your science is, it doesn't necessarily change how we run ourselves. And then you've got this additional problem of the neoclassical economics, which, like you've pointed out, it's not at all science, it's almost pure ideology.
Oliver,
so,
have you read the book by Yuval Noah Harari called Sapiens? Because he says in that book very much what you've just said.
I have relatively recently. I read it. Yeah. And
I've started reading. I haven't finished. What do you think of it?
I think it's a difficult book because he tries to cover such a big subject.
Yeah,
I really liked it. I thought it was great book. So I think I put it in the same category as Jared Diamond, and in fact, he says in the beginning it was inspired by Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Guns, Germs, and Steel.
And it's a similar, like, I call it sort of amateur anthropology, because, and Jared Diamond doesn't have a PhD in anthropology, and apparently other, like, he gets professional anthropologist backs up because he's taken, but I also like Guns, Germs, and Steel, and it's a big picture, and he might be getting some things wrong, and Yuval Harari might be getting some things wrong, but maybe they're joining the dots up in a way that the professional wouldn't. And I think, at least my impression is that they're getting some useful conclusions that.
I very much support that. That was my reaction too. I thought there's a risk in this guy taking such a big picture, going outside his areas of expertise.
Yeah.
But he's bringing into focus questions that are not getting asked, questions that are slipping through the cracks. I think, yes, that's more important. That's more valuable, and it's worth the risk of some minor errors slipping in somewhere. So even though it's a difficult book, and I find it quite tough going, I think he's onto something. I think it's a good book.
Great. So I'll be Steve, once you finished it, I'm really interested to know what you think about it.
Yeah, I've just questioned whether I get any time over the next. That's my problem. I wish I had the time for scholarship, but that's gone out the window, I'm afraid, now with fighting them on climate change.
I think the point that is really useful from Sapiens there is this point you made, Oliver, about science and politics almost being sort of inevitably incommensurable.
I prefer Rutger Bregman, who is a Dutch historian, who I think it was pre-COVID ripped into the World Economic Forum at the World Economic Forum, and he's never being invited back.
The historian, I saw his little segment, yeah.
And his Utopia for Realists and Humankind are easy reads, very informative, and they tell you that the way that politicians and economics think about society and how communities would and could work is total rubbish.
Could you link that, Tony, in the chat?
I'll give you the name of, give you his name and the books. They are easy reads, and you think, yeah, William Golding and Lord of the Flies is total bollocks.
Good.
I agree. I really like Rick Redmond. I've read his first book, not the second one. I really liked it. Yeah. And I saw a clip from the World Economic Forum. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Carlos.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. I just have a quick question, Steve. Would it make a difference if, for example, I know that you've dealt with these people for a long time, but what happens if instead of being sincere, these economists are only responding to economic interests? Would that have a different impact in the end, or would it be exactly the same?
They'd be easier to dislodge if they were being paid to say it. So, you know, if you got a hired hand, you know, you pay the hired hand more money and they change their tune. If they actually believe it anyway, they're being paid because they're saying what they believe, then you can't stop them believing that. They'll continue believing it. I think sincerity is more dangerous. But at the same time, there's so many ways neoclassical economics sincerely supports the elite. Okay? It says, you know, your income is meritocratic. So if you're a wealthy person, it's because you deserve it. They ignore inheritance, which means you leave out the fact that one generation endows the next generation with more or less resources. They're against welfare. You know, welfare reduced they don't like government spending. Of course, that affects, you know, the hospitalization conditions of Rupert Murdoch, but not of ordinary people. Of course, it's the reverse. So what you end up with, the state being destroyed by these people, the safety net being destroyed. They've done immense damage, and they're doing it sincerely, and that is far more dangerous than if they were doing it just as vested interest, because you could ultimately expose, here's the paycheck they're getting, and it's not coming from the poor, it's coming from the rich. Now, instead, most economists, and Carlos, you're probably in this category yourself, you live a reasonable middle-class existence. I certainly did, but nothing really particularly comfortable. And yet these people who are promoting all this stuff are shooting themselves in the foot. They reduce union power. They mean less wage rises for workers. Economists actually are their own worst enemies in terms of their own remuneration, because they've supported all the policies that have weakened university administration, strengthened administration against us, weakened pay rates. You know, it's incredible how they've shot themselves in the foot, and they still sincerely believe that a market solution is best, and the market solution they've posed on higher education has been a catastrophe, as you know.
We need to realize that providing knowledge and information does not lead to changing behavior.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of cultural things around it that make begetting change in behavior from difficult to almost impossible. If we think about the Royal Navy going back several hundred years, it was a Royal Navy doctor who did a brilliant study that showed that if the sailors drank citrus juice, they didn't get scurvy. It took the Royal Navy over 150 years to provide lime juice routinely to its sailors. And we haven't got any better.
Yeah, yeah. And like that's why I find Kuhn's arguments about paradigms so important, because again, scientists aren't really different to other elements of humanity. They believe their paradigms as firmly as religious people believe in the virgin birth, you know. But because they've got the filter of empirical validation, then they can undermine their own beliefs, because and this is what Kuhn argued. Has anybody here not read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn? Okay, that's on your reading list. Okay, it's truly brilliant. And the amusing thing is the way that Kuhn got to this, he was a believer. He'd accepted Popper's theory of conjectures and refutations. And that argues that science comes out of myth. So you have a period where there's myths being put forward, and scientists put forward a bold conjecture and then try to contradict that bold conjecture. Okay. So it's that scientific behavior is to make a conjecture and try to disprove it. Now that actually says a scientist is schizophrenic, fundamentally, when you look at it. And what you find instead is scientists put forward a hypothesis and tried to prove it, but because it was not a complete explanation of the real world, or it was fundamentally wrong, that attempt to verify would actually end up leading to contradictions. And you go through a period of a scientific revolution and then a new paradigm. But an essential part of that process was you had a new generation that knew of the anomaly. The professors couldn't be persuaded to abandon the paradigm, but the professors aged and died. And when they died, they were replaced by new students, and there was generational change. That doesn't happen in economics. You don't get generational change, you get fracture and fissure. And so you get critics like me, but the mainstream believers, they can always find somebody who swallows this vision of a perfectly meritocratic, stable system, maximizing utility, minimizing cost, and they continue reproducing themselves. You don't get generational change, so economics avoids undergoing true scientific revolutions.
The Kindle edition is available for £1.99p on Amazon.
Oh, that guy's book,
Thomas Kuhn.
Oh, Kuhn. Oh, great.
50th anniversary edition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've got the physical, but I don't think I've got the electronic. So $1.99.
Yeah,
I'll take you up on that, and I'll buy it after we finish talking. Sounds good. Funnily enough, one of the funny incidents, and this, I think I found it and lost it again. I think I found it online recently. Popper had this idea of conjectures and refutations. Okay, bold conjecture, and then you refute it, and that's how science advances. How do you think he reacted to Kuhn?
Not well.
Exactly. He contradicted his own definition of the schizophrenic behavior of scientists by saying, oh, fantastic, Kuhn has come along and taken my conjecture and refuted it. Wonderful science advance. No. Oh, no, that's just terrible. Scientists can't possibly behave the way Kuhn says. They can't be a community. They can't have a belief system. They try to prove, etc., etc. He refused to abandon his own paradigm. They're quite comical. Okay, everybody, I'll see you all tomorrow again, and a few others, and then next few weeks I'm off, so a bit of a break. So great to see you all again. Thank you again.
Okay,
Bye.
Thanks, Steve. Cheers now.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.